Almost live. And here we are. Well, I'm Wolfram Alderson, and I'm CEO of the Hypoglycemia Support Foundation. And I'm here with my colleague, Roberta Ruggiero, who is founder and president of the Hypoglycemia Support Foundation, and with our honored guest here on our second blood sugar hotline program. I don't know if it's number 2 or number 3, Roberta, you'll have to remind me, but we're really happy to have Steve here to talk about a very special substance, which may be an enormous solution for people with hypoglycemia and type 2 diabetes. And so I thought we'd start off with Roberta just giving a brief introduction, and then Steve will get the conversation going. Thank you for being here with us.
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you, Wolfram, because you suggested that Steve Hanley join us, and then you gave me his background and the reason why, and I am so excited, but I'm not going to let the audience know because I'm going to pass everything over to the two of you. And what I'm so excited about is not only are you going to talk about a subject or a project, a product, but I know you, Wolfram, you like to go into the why and how and the real science of it. So that's what the two of you are going to go to today. And I think the audience is just going to soak it up. But I just want to let the audience know that we're not here just talking about a product, okay? For the last, excuse me, I keep on getting spam. I'm going to close this up. For the last 41 years, I've been hearing from searching hypoglycemics, and they're desperate. And we come to realize that sugar is the leading culprit contributing to the hypoglycemia symptoms. So they want to know, okay, so the sugar, it's so addictive, I can't get rid of it. It's all around me, it's surrounding me, it's consuming me, it's making me worse, it's making me sick. I'm now becoming diabetic. You know, what's the answer? So I think today you may give them a little bit of hope. But there's something that I wrote almost 30 years ago. So I'm going to start this and hand it over to you, but I'm going to read it first. Now, almost 30 years ago, at least. I think it's mostly what my words, I may have somebody else's words in there, so I hope they don't come after me. It's a whole 3 or 4 pages. I'm just going to read the first paragraph, but the title was Just How Sugar-Coated is Our World. It has been called the white plague, the quiet killer, the mark of Cain. Adjectives before its name have ranged from addictive and destructive to poisonous and deadly. It has been written that it causes often fatal diseases, contributes to our nation's crime and delinquency, may be at the root of the most mental and emotional problems, and is the leading offender in addictions. From just making you slightly ill, it has the strength to kill. What is this power that can control man and at the same time his world? To see it is white, pure, and crystal in form. To taste it, it is the king of sweeteners that lures its victims with venom juice. Once it has its hold on you, beware. You've just been introduced to sugar. So that's powerful. And all these years, 20, 30 years, and when I started 41, 42 years ago, no one has an answer. So I'm going to pass it over to you and Wolfram. So thank you, Wolfram. Thank you, Steve Hanley. If I hear something or have a question, I'll come in, I'll raise my hand, but otherwise the two of you have a platform. Take it.
Well, Steve, we're going to give you the podium here in just a minute, but and let the audience know who is Steve. But essentially, my work over the last 4 decades, similar to Roberta, is that I've been advocating on behalf of consumers and communities for human and environmental health, and oftentimes imploring companies, especially in the last 10 years, as our awareness about sugar, added sugar in the diet, imploring them to do business differently. And seems like nobody's listening. And we also know that we can't just pull the sugar out, because if we do that, a lot of people simply won't, they'll just rush over and buy the products that do have the sugar in it. So we need something to replace that sweetness, because our palate, the human palate, has grown accustomed to sweetness in virtually 75% of all products that are on the shelf. And I thought, just before we get, again, just to give the audience a sense of, added sugar, and what the world's leading authorities say is the World Health Organization says that there should be no more than 10% of your total calories come from added sugar, which comes out to about 12 teaspoons per day. They actually suggest that we cut that in half if possible. But the official no more than 10% of total calories is the globally accepted standard at this point in time. Where we're at right now is the average person is consuming anywhere from 17 to 22 teaspoons of added sugar per day, at least in the US diet. And in other countries, it's higher, some it's lower, but we're still way, way over that global threshold. And so again, we come back to this problem. How do we reduce added sugar in the diet? We know that our consumption is too high. Companies know that they're putting too much sugar in their products. So this really brings us to your doorstep, Steve, and you can just tell us, how you got here. Roberta and I have been on the consumer advocacy side. Maybe you could just share a little bit about your business and how you arrived at the doorstep of this substance called allulose.
Thank you, Wolfram. Thank you, Roberta. By the way, Roberta, your opening remarks were inspiring and then some. And as I mentioned prior to the commencement of the podcast, I think what you and Wolfram have done at the Hypoglycemia Support Foundation is noble and virtue infused. And I greatly applaud the extraordinary megaphone that you've created to help those in need for this very, very important circumstance. My name is Steve Hanley. I'm the founder and CEO of Nutrishus Brands, Inc., a company that was incorporated back in May of 2019. So we've now been around for about coming close to 2.5 years. We are a health and wellness company that's disguised as a food company, because frankly, I am not concerned about how much of my product sells as much as how much my product can provide relief to those in need of a solution for sugar. And our simple prime directive is as follows. We believe that sugar is the root cause of all chronic illness. We know, as Wolfram artfully articulated, that sugar is in 75 to 80% of all food and beverage. And therefore, the simple axiom is that if you could replace every gram of toxic arsenious cane sugar with a gram of healthy sugar, it would have, by definition, the most profound impact on humanity that's ever been realized. And we think, therefore, that puts us in pretty good position to say that we are at the tip of the spear in terms of important existential issues to be confronted at this time. So there's a lot to talk about over the next 50 minutes. So I'll stop there. But at this point, I'd love to dive in and to be redundant. Once again, great job, Roberta. Great job, Wolfram, in leading this important organization, because what you've done is really, really stellar.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's great to have you here today, because I'll just reiterate, the problem that we face today is, yes, and if we could wave a magic wand, it would just simply be pull the sugar out, job done. But we know that it's not just a matter of sugar reduction, it's also a matter of sugar replacement. And we also know that we've had a wide variety of non-caloric sweeteners come forward. And there's been a lot of concerns that maybe those aren't as healthy as we might think they are, even though they don't have the calories. So there's some research, and many people have asked about this, about diet sodas and some of these non-caloric sweeteners is, are these better for you? Well, in general, just the research shows, yes, they're better for you. There's less calories and therefore people gain less weight. But interestingly, people still gain weight while consuming diet sodas and other non-caloric sweeteners. So if there's no calories, why are they gaining weight? So the research is still, ongoing around this, but the basic idea is that the endocrine system, which creates the hormones that make decisions in your body about whether you're insulin resistant and whether how you metabolize food and fats and sugars, sees that artificial sugar, whether it's from a natural source or an unnatural source, and it tells your body, that's still sugar, even though there's no calories, and therefore your endocrine system responds in a similar way. So let's look at allulose, and starting just with the scientific, sort of definition of what allulose is. I do have a slideshow handy, and I didn't want to necessarily go through PowerPoint slides, but I do have it handy because I think it's helpful, and I can pull it up perhaps while you're talking, just to show the chemical structure of allulose, because I think it's really interesting how we're able to, it's kind of a swords to plowshares story, converting essentially what could be a harmful sugar, fructose, into a beneficial sugar, allulose. So it's a really interesting story on the chemical front. And I don't want to make this a hyper scientific talk, but I think there's some real interesting science here. And maybe you could start with that. And if you don't mind, I'll just pull up this slide in the background while you're talking.
Yeah, well, before you pull up the slide,
Sure.
Let's provide the audience with
Sure.
a measure of background. So our tagline is that RX sugar, and the reason for the brand name, by the way, is we believe that food should be medicine, right? So RX sugar, right? Food as medicine, is the world's best tasting, healthiest natural plant-based sugar and syrup. So let's break that down. First of all, RX sugar, which is the brand name for, as Wolfram put forth, an ingredient called allulose, allulose, is a natural sugar. And that's been decreed by the FDA, by scientists. It's a fact that it's a monosaccharide, it's a natural plant-based sugar, which is very different from the three alternatives that Wolfram referred to that have sprung forth as almost pretenders to the throne of trying to knock down the toxic impact of standard sugar. So the first is artificial sweeteners. You're very familiar with that, the pink, the blues, the yellows, the greens, right? The Splendas, the Equals, the Sweet and Lows, and so on. Those are artificial sweeteners. Those have deleterious effects, as Wolfram mentioned, relative to the signaling of the brain, the endocrine system, and other such hazards. The second category are sugar alcohols, which is commonly known as erythritol. And in those cases, those are also not natural plant-based sugars, but instead are derivatives. And the challenge with an erythritol is the fact that the digestive system it's not really friendly with the digestive system, and therefore there's numerous impacts that can cause gastric distress and other challenges for people with IBD, IBS, and so on. And then the third category is what's called high intensity additives, which are commonly referred to as either monk fruit or stevia. In those cases, those aren't sugars at all. In fact, what they do is those are basically sweetness enhancers. And sometimes they're upwards to 200, 300, even 400 times as sweet as standard sugar. So if you use a pinch of it, for example, in a beverage, it might give you a heightened sense of sweetness, which once again has that deleterious impact of lighting up the brain to the sweet impact of the sweet effect, thus causing the ravenous desire for, for more sweet. The other challenge with this third category is that because it's not a sugar, it doesn't provide the function that sugar provides. For example, the binding, the browning, the caramelizing, what's called as the Maillard effect. And those are the functional elements of sugar that support, baked goods and the vast majority of products that, that consumers have. So in recap, there's really only two natural sugars on the planet. There's the poisonous one, the toxic one, the one that is the bad fructose, as Wolfram would ever elaborated. But then there's the good one. So fructose, there's an evil twin and there's a good twin. The good twin is allulose as a natural plant-based sugar, and then the other three, once again, are not traditionally or even scientifically sugars, and that's why they almost get disqualified. So the really good news is that, as the futurist William Gibson said, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So we're not speaking about in theory. Okay, like in the Wall Street Journal today, there was an article about electric cars and this new iron-based technology that in the future would be 1/5 the cost and that type of thing. Well, that's got a 5-7 year, who knows, could be like fusion, could be 30 years out. In this case, our product, our RX sugar, our allulose, we're on shelf in 10,000 stores. We've sold out 3 times on QVC. We're the official sugar and syrup of the Life Cafe within Lifetime Fitness. So it's out there. It works. We have 40 partnerships with not only the Hypoglycemia Support Foundation, but other diabetes and health and wellness centric organizations. So it exists. We have the solution. It's within our hands. We just have to make sure that it's distributed. So with that background, the other thing I wanted to say is that it's certified. So it's USDA organic, non-GMO project verified. It's what's called FODMAP friendly, meaning it's exceedingly low FODMAP. So we're very excited about that partnership because that shows how we alleviate / mitigate / nullify that gastric impact, let's say, that an erythritol has. We're keto certified, we're grain-free, gluten-free certified, we're kosher, we're halal. So it's a validated, FDA-approved natural sugar that is really something that we believe is going to provide an enormity of support. Because if you look at Roberta and Wolfram's website, I don't know, but dozens of times, like dozens and dozens of times, it talks about sugar. And per Roberta's inspiring opening, right? It's all about the white devil, right? It's all about the mark of Cain. It's all about sugar is the new tobacco.com. So with that background, and I'll hand it back to Wolfram. Let's talk about allulose itself and provide some specifics on the science ascribed to allulose.
Yeah, and I will give a little more background too. As somebody who experiences reactive hypoglycemia, as somebody who's diagnosed type 2, as somebody who wears a continuous glucose monitor, when I hear about a substance like allulose, I am as being metabolically beneficial, I'm skeptical. I honestly did my best due diligence to find something wrong with allulose. And I happen to work with an international team of scientists and doctors who are working on what's called a metabolic matrix, a model to help food and beverage companies re-engineer their products so that they're metabolically supportive versus metabolically deranging. And this team also has given a really hard look at allulose. And I'll be honest, I'm glad you're doing well in business and your sales are great. But all I really care about is this good for my health? I've looked at my continuous glucose monitor after I consume allulose in a variety of foods that I've made at home. And I see my blood sugar drop and stabilize for hours, sometimes for 24 hours. And it's happened over and over again. And then I've looked at countless studies, which we'll get to in a moment, that have been done on allulose. And I've yet to find any significant concerns on the scientific front. And that's really where I live, and certainly where the Hypoglycemia Support Foundation lives. You know, we've learned to have to be skeptical and to sort of sort out the sales claims from the scientific claims. And I know that you're very much rooted in the science. So I thought I would just pull up a few slides and we can stop them at any time. I just wanted to have them there as a, you know, as a backup. And so, you know, here we have the chemical structure of allulose, and for most of us, that doesn't really mean a whole lot. We'll come back to that in a minute. You've shared with me that this product is used in a number, I don't know at this point, probably hundreds of products. Most recently, the addition of the Chobani zero sugar yogurt, which is really interesting because that's zero total sugar, not just added sugars. So it's definitely making its way into the marketplace. But what I wanted to get to here is really, you know, what is allulose? And this is where I'm going to turn it back over to you, Steve, because it has this really interesting flip of a molecule. As you can see, we have fructose on the left. You said that, you know, the evil twin, and we have allulose on the right. And just so the audience knows, I mean, most people probably know that, you know, common table sugar, or sucrose as we know it, is pretty much, you know, depending on the source, about 50% glucose, 50% fructose. And if anyone knows, has read on our website and perhaps the work of Dr. Robert Lustig, one of his primary concerns has been fructose and how it's metabolized in the liver and is a leading cause of metabolic disorders such as type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and so on. So it's to me, it's really, really interesting what allulose is, how it occurs in nature, because it is a naturally occurring sugar in nature, but isn't metabolized by the human body, and then how it's produced, you know, for the food and beverage industry by flipping this molecule. Maybe you could just talk about this a little bit.
Indeed, thank you. Well stated. So, as Wolfram pointed out, the structures of the basic molecule for fructose and allulose are, it's a mirror. In fact, there's only one specific bond, as you can see, what's highlighted in red, the oxygen and hydrogen bond that's flipped. But that flipped bond within the molecule has an enormity of impact, most notably, and obviously we're going to be using lay speak here, right? So let's,
yes,
you know,
please.
Using some basic, right? So because the human body doesn't recognize allulose because of this flipped OH bond, it gets absorbed in the upper gastrointestinal tract. And as proven by science, whatever allulose you consume, it's urinated out of the body. And therefore, it doesn't get into the lower GI where the possible gastric distress can take place. It also drags glucose out of the body. So that's why, per Wolfram wearing his continuous glucose monitor, you know, companies like Dexcom and Omnipod and others, and it's really an evolving, very explosive, very exciting field these days, the CGM field. But think about the words continuous glucose monitor. So therefore, if allulose is dragging glucose from your body, by definition, it's going to lower the glucose in your body. In addition, the other health benefits include, once you accept that as a premise, which once again is proven, right? And on our website at rxsugar.com, you can see hundreds of these catalog studies. The other benefits start to accrue because think about it. If it's being absorbed in the upper GI and is being disposed of through the urinary tract, then of course it doesn't engage with the rest of the Krebs cycle. It doesn't engage with the pancreas. It doesn't touch the liver. So that's why these claims of prevent fatty liver disorders or prevent impact on what's called the insulinemic effect, right? The release of insulin from the non-brain signaling, which Unilever proved in a major study. It all makes sense because if it's not there to engage with the process or the organs, these target organs, then by definition you're gonna have those benefits. So that's what's that's probably the most exciting part about allulose, is that it's a real natural plant-based sugar. It's a mirror of fructose, which we know is the sweet part of sucrose, right? Because as Wolfram said, it's 50% fructose, 50% glucose. For those in the audience who have heard of high fructose corn syrup, basically what that simply means is that the composition is 60% fructose, 40% glucose, ergo high fructose corn syrup as opposed to the standard sucrose.
Yeah.
And so by definition, we mitigate, eliminate metabolic effect. And our mission, I mean, we have a sworn attestation amongst myself and our colleagues, and even our partners, even our investors, et cetera. We will never, ever release a product that will cause any measure of metabolic impact. So we make sure that we test. And in fact, one of our sort of employee number 2 is our SVP of alliances and partnerships. And she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes like 20 years ago. And we have numerous other individuals who are living with type 1 diabetes. We make sure that they try the product, obviously in a very, in the safest of environments, right? Pancake syrup, chocolate syrup, et cetera. And they officially respond with the fact that, once again, straight, no impact, it goes down. In fact, we think, and Wolfram, I imagine you would agree with this, but probably one of the top people in the world of keto is Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. And Dr. Dominic has been very gracious in receiving our product, has been completely independent in his assessment of it, but has posted screenshots of his CGM showing that there's no impact. And in fact, it goes down. Other individuals who are widely speaking on the behalf of allulose, Dr. Peter Attia, is another one who was published back in December 6th, in fact, of 2020, came out with a huge white paper supporting allulose. So the science is behind us, but it's all explained by this nice slide that Wolfram's showing, which is just that it's a natural sugar. It has a different molecular composition via just one flip bond. And because of that, and because the body not recognizing and disposing of it efficiently while dragging glucose out of your body, all of these benefits accrue.
Thank you, Stephen. And again, as a consumer advocate, I respect what you say, and there's a lot of doctors out there that say that seem to be supporting the substance, but also it's important to know that the FDA went through an extensive process of vetting this substance, approved it unanimously, and they came to the conclusion that it's unmetabolized in the human body. Even though it's a natural sugar, it is not included. It is not required to be included in the amount of total sugars declared on the food label. And so this is a really significant point. It has not yet been approved in the European Union, but is on track for that and has been approved. You can probably know the other countries around the world where it has been approved. But I'll move, because we've already actually started to dive in a little bit into how this substance is actually metabolized. I think, people are going to hear, well, that's great. It has it's the good twin of the evil twin, fructose, but it sounds like just another chemical. Why should I care? Certainly, yes. I mean, in a perfect world, nobody needs any sweeteners. We just like eating foods without any sugars at all. But let's just take ice cream, for example. I've had to go for many, many years without eating any ice cream because of for my health. And when I learned about allulose, I decided to get an ice cream machine and try to make my own ice cream that would be metabolically supportive. I was just astounded that by using whole fat creams and using allulose, that again, as I mentioned, my blood sugar drops into the safe zone. I don't go hypo. It doesn't drop below the normal range. It drops into the normal range and stabilizes. I mean, if anybody's seen a CGM app or report, you would typically, for the folks with hypoglycemia in the audience, you're going to see your blood sugar going up and down and up and down, depending on what kind of foods you're eating. Of course, carbohydrates and sugars are the big driver behind that. And this up and down, this roller coaster, which we've described very much in detail with our blood sugar roller coaster infographic, is actually really harmful. It's not just the ups and it's not just the downs, it's the process of going up and down throughout the day, which is really hard on your metabolic system. So the idea that there could be a health stabilizing food that stabilizes my blood sugar for hours at a time, and that it's coming from a sweetener or it's coming from ice cream, sort of blows my mind. And so maybe, looking at this chart, I think you've already touched on this, that, the human body doesn't break down allulose, but you also talked about this pulling out of glucose. And, why does that help? Because clearly, people with hypoglycemia and people with type 2 who are on the spectrum of insulin resistance are in a stage of health where their body is having a hard time metabolizing sugars in a healthy way. And so if there's a substance that can help move that sugar off of our metabolic load, if you will, and help us stabilize our blood glucose, well, that to me sounds sort of revolutionary. So I'll turn it over to you again. If you have any comments on this, again, this isn't meant to be a highly technical conversation, but, in order to understand allulose, I think it's really important to understand just a little bit of the science. So if you have any comments here, let me know.
Sure. No, that's terrific. Actually, you referenced the FDA, and just being slightly cheeky, there's always going to be people in the audience that have the famous Brad Pitt line from the movie that if something sounds too good to be true, it ain't. Yeah. Well, in this case, a little bit more background with allulose. It was actually discovered in 1940. So it's actually been around for over 80 years. And over the course of time, once again, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies. It was ruled by the FDA 10 years ago as what's called GRAS, generally regarded as safe, ergo why it could be sold in the US market. The primary reason, as Wolfram touched on with the European Union, is because a company had created a GMO version of it, which of course is taboo in Europe. So now with Germany is producing allulose, we expect that approval to come through shortly. But here is the key. Why wasn't it adopted until very recently? In fact, adopted by companies like Chobani, which is about to do a $10 billion IPO, which has earned the moniker of being the #1 yogurt company in the world, right? Product that's generally regarded as more healthy rather than less healthy, right? And yet, and they're using allulose. And here's why. The FDA not only approved it, not only made it generally regarded as safe, but on April 19th of 2019, the FDA ruled that it's so unique, that it's so uniquely metabolized by the body, that it doesn't need to appear on the nutrition facts panel as a sugar, which is, Wolfram used the words like mind-blowing. Well, think about that. The FDA is saying that this is a real natural plant-based sugar, full stop, once again, with 10 certifications. And yet it's such a healthy sugar that it doesn't belong on the nutrition facts panel, showing up in terms of the number of calories or grams or added sugars, even like those others I spoke of earlier today, like the erythritol, the monk fruits, the stevias, and those do show up. So because of that ruling, that's what opened the floodgates. That's why I started the company literally 11 days later on May 1st of 2019. That's when we got our state of Georgia incorporation license. Because think about it. We now have a natural sugar that comes off the label. So if anyone in the audience, candidly, if you had two of the same exact products in your hand, they looked the same, they smelled the same, they taste the same, and one showed 0 grams sugar and one showed, let's say, 25 grams of sugar, you're going to choose the 0 grams 11 out of 10 times. Similarly, the big food companies, they realize that the consumers want less sugar. Even though they want stuff that tastes sweet, if they can show you a package that shows 0 sugar on it, that you're going to be more prone to buy that. So that's why that FDA ruling in April of 2019 opened the floodgates. And that's why for those folks who are out there saying like, how come I've never heard of this? How come everyone's not using it? Because while it's 80 years old on one hand, on the other hand, it's like 24 months old. And that's why we've had this adoption rate upwards to 10,000 stores and selling out, as I mentioned, not due to me or my teammates, but due to the fact that consumers want zero sugar. And that's why Coke, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper, their #1 brands today, are zero sugar.
Can I ask a few questions?
Go ahead,
Steve,
please.
Steve, I was going over these slides with Wolfram yesterday, and I said, please, let's show the one about Chobani, the yogurt, because I could hear from so many of my audience, my hypoglycemia community, they don't know what to eat, especially for a snack. They're longing for a snack. And when I heard about this with no sugar, I said, oh my God, I have to go out and get it. So I went to 3 stores yesterday. Nobody has it without sugar. In fact, I even went to like Fresh Market, which is like a Whole Foods. They must have had 10 different types of Chobani, nothing without the sugar-free. So I'm sure hoping that it comes to South Florida. On another question,
Wait, Roberta, let me interrupt you real fast. Have you been to Publix? Because I know that they chose Publix as the first chain to roll out. So I live in Hilton Head, and I literally have 20 of them in my fridge because I eat 2 a day. Have you been to Publix?
God. I do have Publix that's real close, and I thought the health food stores would have it. Thank you so much for that. And I'm so glad that my people will be listening to it. So they'll be running out for it, because that's what they want. They want something that, they could put their fresh nuts or a fruit in it and feel that they're not being deprived. Because once deprivation starts in, they can't stand it. That addiction just comes, flooding through, and then they just grab whatever. So that's great. On another thing, I have to be curious, and I don't know how much time we have, but I have to ask you. So you started this 2 years ago. How? Out of the clear blue sky? I mean, what was your interest in sugar? Do you have hypoglycemia, diabetes? Do you have someone that you know? I mean, did you just pick this because of you saw it successful? Is there something you'd like to share with us? Because I'm just very curious.
Sure. So it's a great question. And I am definitely not the type that has that famous background story of having some measure of circumstance that I was dealing with, that I was just yearning for a solution. Instead, candidly, my mom had me read a lot of Ayn Rand and a lot of Agatha Christie as a teenager. And Agatha Christie's, one of her more famous characters is Hercule Poirot, the Belgian detective. And the reason why he said he was the world's greatest detective is because he sees the world as he thinks it should be. And when it's not, it is plain to him as the nose on the middle of the face. And for me, I've always had this ravenous intellectual curiosity. And as I was actually a tech executive. I worked for companies like SAP, one of the world's largest software companies, PricewaterhouseCoopers in consulting. But I read a book by our great friend, Dr. David Perlmutter, called Grain Brain. And then I read another book by Dr. William Davis called Wheat Belly. And then I became enamored by individuals like Gary Taubes, who wrote not only Good Calorie, Bad Calorie, but The Case Against Sugar, and more recently, The Case for Keto. Dr. Lustig has always been a hero to me, who's Wolfram's dear friend. I also read the book Michael Moss's Salt, Sugar, Fat, which won the Pulitzer Prize. His recent book is called Hooked. Nina Teicholz, huge friend of mine. The Great Fat Surprise, right? The Big Fat Surprise was the book of the year. New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. Certainly, Sam Apple wrote a recent book called Ravenous about Otto Warburg. And he's discovered the Warburg effect, about how sugar causes cancer, how sugar perpetuates and feeds and fuels cancer. So because of that intellectual curiosity, Roberta, I live 24/7, I guess, with an illness, but my illness is my inability to reconcile that an ingredient that, as Dr. Lustig has pointed out, not a single human or animal cell in the entire world throughout history has ever needed. It's completely non-nutritive. If it didn't exist, no one would even know it didn't exist. And way back in the day, fruit grew on trees, 1 month out of a year, if the nomads even had exposure to it. And we've taken something that purely to feed the profits of big food and to feed the profits of big pharma and others who have trespassed into this immoral hazard, as Dr. Lustig likes to say. Because of that, we've allowed countries like Brazil and Indonesia and India and Thailand to, frankly, there's no other word for it. They use slave labor, right, at ridiculous low labor rates with abusive workers, and they import this white devil into our country at 12 cents a pound, put it in 80% of all food, and as a result, obesity rates, diabetes rates, metabolic syndrome, liver disorders. I mean, we're helping a study by Dr. Amy Goss at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Roberta, you know what it's about? It's about studying fatty liver in adolescents. Heretofore, you and I, we're probably about the same age. I'm actually older than I look, I think. But I mean, that was a disease of alcoholics. I mean, these 13-year-olds, it's not from drinking. It's from consuming so much sugar that they have fatty liver at the age of 13, to the point where the NIH has given Dr. Goss, who's an amazing individual, $3 million to study it. So that's my background. My background is my inability to reconcile that we allow the existential issue of our planet, the number one cause of death and suffering on our planet, to even exist. And as Wolfram said up front, right? Like, there's challenges to have people forego it or to get these food companies off of it. But here's what's happening, Roberta. What I'm so excited about, and Michael Moss, give him credit, he's written the playbook. And here's the playbook. What took down the tobacco industry? 2 words, addictive and harmful. When they finally got to that breaking point where nicotine and cigarette smoking was formally, officially, categorically declared addictive and harmful, that's when it all fell apart. That's when the $100 billion in lawsuits, and that's why smoking's down to 15% of the nation. And that's why these cowardly big food companies, and remember, there's only 10 companies that control 90% of the brands. That's why they're running to the hills. That's why last week, Pepsi declared they're going to lower sugar in Europe by 25% by 2023 and by 50% by 2025. That's why Coke, as I mentioned earlier, Coke, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, 0 sugar on their labels. That's why even Hershey, 0 sugar on their syrup. That's why all these companies are moving that way, because the lawsuits are coming. The activist investors are coming. I mean, just like engine number 1 now has 4 board seats at Exxon because of the environmental green issues, right? Same thing's happening with big food, and so that's what drives me 14 hours a day, 7 days a week to make sure that we fight this challenge.
Well, Steve, I'm going to bring it back to the consumer level here. And we all have skin in the game in one form or another, and it's great to hear your background. But the ultimate skin in the game is metabolic impact, and this is a huge part of the work that I'm doing right now with an international group of scientists. Metabolism, metabolic health is the North Star of nutrition. All food products, all beverage products on Earth are ultimately metabolized in the human body. And ingredients often start out healthy, but because of the way they're processed, they end up being harmful. For example, even something that's with a fairly low level of processing, like making juice in a blender, in just a matter of minutes, you've destroyed the fiber, you've made the fructose and sugar hyper available, and now you've turned a good thing, fruit, into something that's potentially harmful that could drive fatty liver disease and insulin resistance. So I'm going to try to get through. We have just 15 minutes left, and there are folks online. Some of them may have some questions. I want to leave some time for them, but let's just try to get through a few of these, scientific facts. So you've already mentioned this impact of allulose on glucose. There's this effect on insulin resistance, the stabilizing effect of the endocrine system. There's perhaps some level of assistance in helping the body to uptake glucose in addition to pulling it out, as you were saying. Any other comments here? I mean, there's clearly, and this is all, by the way, this is not a sales slide. This comes from a study. There's been numerous studies, and after the call, Steve, I'll post the link where you've kindly gathered a lot of the studies. But actually, if you go on to PubMed or any of these academic search engines, you can find dozens and maybe even hundreds of studies on allulose. But any other comment here? I'm going to move on to the next slide.
Yeah, I'll be super succinct.
Yeah.
It's categorically self-evident that allulose will mitigate, nullify, eliminate even lower blood sugar. Number two is it's been proven through the continuous glucose monitor technology, but also allulose has what's called the dampening effect. It actually inhibits fat absorption. It prevents the impact of other foods that's with it. So Roberta, you spoke of the Chobani zero sugar yogurt. It actually has 5 carbs in it, but we have test after test after test that if you eat Chobani zero sugar, those 5 carbs don't get registered on the CGM. Your blood sugar actually will stay the same or go down. So that's another big point, Wolfram, is that it has a dampening effect on other foods that are eaten in combination with it.
Yeah, it's a good point, because we talk about the idea in people with blood sugar issues is don't eat unopposed carbohydrates, meaning eat carbohydrates with healthy fats and proteins, and obviously stick to carbohydrates which are lower in starch and preferably not processed. But here we're adding an additional opposition to the carbohydrate load, or basically the glucose load on the body, which is allulose, which seems to also be in opposition to that carb load. We won't go in depth here, but the point of this slide is that there's not only a benefit to your endocrine system, but it's a neuroendocrine benefit, which means that there's actually appears to be a benefit to the brain. On the left-hand side, you see the activity of glucose and fructose, how it activates certain parts of the brain. Anybody who's dealing with hypoglycemia or reactive hypoglycemia knows what brain fog is. We know what happens when we get a big bolus, a load of sugar in our body. All kinds of things happen, and especially to our behavior, to the way we feel. And I know Roberta has many stories that she can tell personally, as well as from the audience, but what we see here is that allulose has zero impact. This also shows sucralose, which is a artificial sugar, having the same effect, but of course sucralose doesn't have all these other benefits that come along with allulose.
Well, and more importantly, let's be super candid here. Splenda, which is owned by Heartland, they're the ones who make their Splenda product is sucralose. That's how it's advertised. For the audience, please go to the store and pick up a bag of Splenda. You won't see sucralose as the first listed ingredient. And remember, ingredients are listed in order of percentage of inclusion.
Right.
You will see maltodextrin, which has a glycemic impact of 110. So don't let this chart fool you, thinking like, oh, I bought Splenda, that's sucralose, so it's not going to register in my brain. It'll light up your brain like a 4th of July fireworks show, because they spike it with maltodextrin, but of course they don't realize that. In fact, to be candid, Splenda now has an allulose product. Notice how my ingredient label says nothing but allulose, 100% allulose, nothing else is in it. Do you know what Splenda has? Natural flavors, because they got the FDA to do one of those special rulings where a natural flavor, which consists of these spiked elements like the monk fruit, stevia, whatever. So they've adulterated their particular brand. So please don't buy that product, because you will not be getting the same benefit.
Right.
Wow.
So with allulose, what you see is what you get. Of course, it's always possible the food industry can fool around, but anyway, I won't dwell too much here. I'll post the study, the link, which has a whole list of studies on allulose. Not a lot of studies on humans, but there have been studies, and those are referenced here, but they're also on your list. Just also a brief note here, how it's manufactured. I think I've mentioned it's like a swords to plowshare story. In a sense, it's good news as far as the industry goes. Yes, we just love it if all the companies making high fructose corn syrup would just stop and go away, but that isn't going to happen. But there is an opportunity for companies that are making fructose or high fructose corn syrup from corn, and possibly other sources of starch. I think Germany is working on making allulose from beets, and maybe there's some other sources potentially. The point is that these companies can still make a buck. Farmers can still grow corn, and we simply convert the substance into a metabolically beneficial substance. We've already touched on this, the regulatory status in the US. It's been approved. It's been, I think, a fairly unanimous and supportive statement. You notice here it says the first time the FDA has stated its intent to allow a sugar to not be included as part of the total or added sugar declarations on labels. So I think that's a really key point for the consumer. And then just, how do we tolerate this? You mentioned the sugar alcohols, which famously, at least for me and many others I've spoken to, the erythritol, the maltol, the sorbitols, famous for causing gas and for digestive upset. Allulose is not metabolized by the body, and that does mean there is a threshold. I think when I've spoken with you and your colleagues, it's generally agreed to be around 70 grams per day would be sort of the upper threshold, which, if you were to translate that into teaspoons of sugar, that would be almost 20 teaspoons, which is a lot. So it's unlikely you'll reach that threshold. And yes, I personally, because I've done quite a few experiments with the substance, have reached that threshold. But the good news is basically your body lets you know in a very clear way that you've reached that threshold. But there is no real safety, I think, or any medical concerns that have arisen around that threshold. Maybe you could just comment on that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, it's sort of like you should never have too much of a good thing. I mean, it just really is. It sort of becomes one of those circumstances where if you just go completely over the top with it, then any sort of food's going to have that kind of impact, as we're all aware. I mean, anyone who's ever had an overeating circumstance recognizes bloat and other challenging, constructs. But getting back, I think what's key is Wolfram, Dr. Lustig, they've put together this amazing sort of triangle of health, which includes protect the liver, feed the gut, and support the brain. So one of our newest products coming out, because we recognize its dampening effect, is going to be an RX sugar that you'll consume either with every meal or once or twice a day. It has a prebiotic fiber, it has the RX sugar, and it has a probiotic in it that has 10 billion strains, 18-month shelf life, et cetera. And because whenever there's been several dozen human studies, and in those cases, they've shown that as little as 5 grams of allulose a day has created all of these benefits. So we're hoping to become like part of everyday meals, because it helps to mitigate and nullify and dampen the impact of some of these carb-based inputs.
And as you mentioned, it's been on the GRAS list for 10 years. Always, we can take that with a grain of salt, because one of the first things on the GRAS list is nail polish remover. So, but the point is that various scientific bodies have looked at the substance, and so far the evidence is telling us that it's
a little more than that. So you're right about GRAS in general, but the April 2019 was the second time around, and Wolfram, it's so effective, it's so compelling, that in Q4 of last year, of 2020, the FDA put out a new policy for comment, in which right now they just show the calories as 10%, right, the 0.4, but they still show the carbs on the label. They're so sure now that there is no caloric impact, that there is no carb-based impact. They want to remove that from the label as well, which is another wonderful incentive for these big food companies who are once again trying to escape the lawsuits, moving to a healthier alternative because once again, every consumer, if they see lower carbs, lower sugar, that provides inducements to buy. Because when people change their behavior, their diet-based behavior, 80% of the time, the first thing they do, which is obvious, they reduce sugar. Then they try to eat more fruits and vegetables. Then they look for lower carbs, and then lastly, healthier sources of protein. So the FDA has now taken this down 3 or 4 times, and it's evolving to the better, not any measure of like, we're finding some bad studies out there, we better put the reins on this. If anything, they're our rocket booster taking us forward.
So the evidence is piling up, and just again, I'm trying to just give a brief overview for our community of folks that have been dealing with blood sugar issues, many of which for many years, many of which have family members suffering from blood sugar dysregulation, hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia. And so I think there's a few key things to consider at this point. We know, for example, there's been a recent study that the rates of type 2 diabetes amongst children may have increased by as much as 2 times during the pandemic. And certainly a big factor in that is diet. We may be turning to comfort foods. We may be letting our nutritional standards down, but something really, really serious is going on. We know that metabolic disease interacts with COVID-19, and that 3 out of the 4 leading risk factors are associated with metabolic health. And so I think finding a solution for sugar, reducing sugar, replacing sugar right now is, it's not just a matter of, blood sugar, but really potentially surviving the pandemic of COVID-19, which is really a pandemic on top of a pandemic. Metabolic disease was already, killing many more people than the COVID-19 virus. And we know that, 75% of all foods and beverages right now contain added sugar. I'm co-founder of a company called Perfect, which has created a way to filter the food supply. We created a filter for the Hypoglycemia Support Foundation. And just one of those criteria, no added sugar, literally screens out 75% of all products on the shelf. So it's really astounding. And then we look at other, substances in the foods which are harmful. We touched briefly on other forms of sweeteners, and you did a good job at differentiating between these different types of sweeteners. I don't think we need to go too much into depth here. Again, the studies that are on your website will point to those. But what we're looking at here is really the next generation of sweeteners. There are some other sweeteners out there which may emerge. They're figuring out how to turn proteins into sweeteners, and there may be other solutions on the shelf eventually. But right now, I'm most hopeful about allulose as a solution. Again, if you want to eat foods without any sweeteners or any sugars at all, we encourage you to do that. But it's very hard for a lot of people. We've all grown accustomed to sweetness. A great example, as we've referenced already, is this product which has come out. I prefer to have yogurt without any fruit or any sweeteners or anything else in it. But a lot of people like yogurt with some flavor, with some fruit, with some, jazz, whatever you want to call it. And it's just fascinating that Chobani has come out with this product, which, as you can see, contains allulose and has 0 total sugar, which is really, this is the first time any yogurt's come onto the market that has 0 total sugar.
That's right. And there's 4 flavors: vanilla, raspberry, mixed berry, and then a blueberry. By the way, only because I don't want to run out of time, but in support of the fantastic foundation that you and Roberta have built, there is a discount code, HSF, right? Hypoglycemia Support Foundation 20, HSF 20. So Wolfram, if you would post that for the audience.
I'll post it on the link afterwards.
rxsugar.com. And I'm not trying to do that for a commercial plug, but just, I know many of you hopefully are intrigued by what we've discussed today, and therefore the support for your great foundation. We're offering that unlimited time discount, HSF 20 at rxsugar.com.
Great. We'll post that link. I do encourage, the audience, obviously, to make up their minds for themselves. Look at the evidence. Take the same approach I did. I looked as hard as I could to find holes in your product, find holes in allulose. And so far I haven't. I've tried it myself. I use a CGM. I test every food. I watch my glucose spikes during the day. And honestly, nothing has had the effect that allulose has had. That includes whole fats, proteins. It's just remarkable to see. And I really understand why you've called your product RX Sugar, because honestly, that's how it's affected me. And in a sense, I'm a believer. But I'm still a skeptic. And both Roberta and I, for many years, have looked at, many products with had a lot of promise, and often we've been disappointed. And so this is really encouraging. But we want consumers to try it themselves if they are looking for an alternative to sugar. And if they want to try it, then they can get a discount with this code. So we've reached the top of the hour. I want to thank you. I mean, we really tried to pile a lot of information in here, but if we are going to point to a solution that could help people with hypoglycemia and blood sugar, we want to make sure that it's rooted in the evidence and there's some level of scientific understanding why this product is good for you, apart from any of the wonderful things you said about your company and the history and so on. It really boils down, like I said, to metabolism. How does this substance metabolize in your body? And it appears that it has a metabolically beneficial impact, and that's what excites us. And we're so appreciative to have you with us today. And we look forward to. I'm going to guess that people are going to have a lot of questions. Please go to our Facebook page and feel free to post and help. Maybe you could even post the link on your website to the studies and the discount code and share that with the audience. And I'm sure you're happy to, if people have questions. I know that anytime we've had a question for you regarding allulose, you've gotten back to me right away, and you have a lot of good resources on your website. So before we give you the final word, Steve, Roberta, any comment before we close? We're already a couple minutes past the hour, and I want to respect everyone's time.
I still have a half a dozen questions. We have to do this again.
Yeah.
Have to do this again. Thank you so much, Steve. I'm so thrilled that we finally met, and what a wealth of information. Okay, take care.
Well, Roberta, no, it's a privilege and an honor. And I know the moment we conclude this session, you're heading to Publix to buy that Chobani Zero Sugar. So,
Yes.
So get your car warmed up.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks again, Steve. We really appreciate your
Take
time
care.
and your expertise, and wish you the best.
Okay, likewise. Thank you so much for the great job you do.
Bye now.
Thank you.